The idea for such an organization was conceived during the war, leading to the declaration by United Nations on January 1, 1942, where 26 nations pledged to continue their fight against the Axis powers. The name and concept of the UN were crystallized during this declaration. The United Nations, often known as the UN, was established in the aftermath of World War II with the primary aim of preventing future conflicts and promoting peace and international cooperation. The formal structure of the UN was finalized at the San Francisco Conference, officially known as the United Nations Conference on International Organization, which took place from April 25 to June 26, 1945. Delegates from 50 nations participated, culminating in the signing of the UN Charter, which established the organization's structure and rules. Preparatory conversations about the structure of the UN took place at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in 1944, involving representatives from China, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These discussions were crucial in laying the groundwork for the UN Charter. These discussions were followed by the Yalta Conference in February 1945, where leaders Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin outlined more details about the future structure and governance of the UN, including the introduction of veto powers for the permanent 5 members of the upcoming Security Council. The UN was founded on principles such as the sovereign equality of all of its members, the obligation of states to faithfully fulfill their charter commitments, and the resolution of international disputes through peaceful means. The UN officially came into existence on October 24, 1945, after the Charter was ratified by the key signatories. This date is now celebrated annually as United Nations Day. The United Nations has played a pivotal role in post-war reconstruction, particularly in Europe, and in the decolonization process during the 1950s and 1960s, demonstrating its central role in global governance. It has also been involved in numerous peacekeeping and conflict resolution efforts worldwide. Furthermore, the UN has been a significant player in promoting human rights, notably through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and addressing global challenges such as climate change, terrorism, and health crises. Its main organs include the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat, which is led by the Secretary-General. These bodies are designed to coordinate efforts across various issues despite the United Nations expansion from its founding membership of 51 states to nearly all internationally recognized independent countries today, totaling 193 members. The organization has been subject to a wide range of criticism since its founding, most of which have focused on different facets of its operations, results, and structure. Some of the most common criticisms are those related to ineffectiveness and inefficiency. Perceived biases and the lack of transparency in dispute resolution. The UN's bureaucratic inefficiencies are frequently cited by critics, who point out that the organization can be slow to respond to crises because of its convoluted and time-consuming decision-making procedures. This is made worse by the necessity for major powers to reach an agreement in the Security Council, where the veto power of the 5 permanent members can prevent meaningful action. Despite multiple peacekeeping missions, the UN has been perceived as unable to prevent or terminate conflicts effectively, with certain missions dogged by accusations of wrongdoing and ineffectiveness. The UN has also been criticized for its inefficiency in settling disputes. Examples include UN's perceived inadequacy in the face of mass murder and genocide in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The UN has also struggled with issues of accountability and transparency. Critics claim that the UN is very opaque when it comes to financial expenditures and decision-making, and that this opacity can compromise. Additionally, the organization's reputation might fuel impressions of corruption. The UN has been charged with taking a biased stance on global issues, frequently weighing the interests of its most powerful members over the ideals of equality and justice for everyone. Regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other Middle East crises, when the UN's actions, or lack thereof, have been perceived as part of a larger geopolitical bias, this criticism is especially vociferous. Let us halt for a moment. Would you please help us? If you like our work, please click the like button to support us even more. We also appreciate your feedback and opinions in the comments section, which helps us grow. The Security Council itself is a major source of conflict because of the way its members are composed and how their power relationships reflect the post-World War II system rather than the reality of today's globe. Critics of this structure point to its unequal influence and unrepresentative government, and they demand reforms that include giving new authorities and more equitable distribution of decision-making authority. Authorities other than the chief critic, the BRICS nations and a number of countries from the global south have been vocal about the need for comprehensive reforms at the UN, pointing out the unwarranted influence of Western powers, particularly in the Security Council, where the 5 permanent members of the UN, the UK, France, Russia, and China, possess veto rights. The BRICS nations are among the top group that has been criticizing the UN for a long time. The BRICS group, which represents around 25% of global GDP and more than 40% of the world's population, maintains that the current organization is out of step with modern global dynamics. Proposals to expand the Security Council to include permanent seats for major developing countries have gained some momentum in recent years, but Western nations have resisted them. African nations, which make up about 28% of the UN's membership, are among those who lack permanent representation on the Council. Critics claim that Western countries control a disproportionate share of voting power in major global financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, sidelining emerging economies and complicating efforts to establish a representative global governance framework. BRICS countries regularly bring up claims of bias and double standards by Western states in international organizations, such as the UN, especially when it comes to human rights. Both China and Russia, 2 members of the BRICS, frequently face international criticism for their domestic policies, while comparable problems in Western nations seem to draw less attention. Worldwide criticism of this alleged double standard includes differences in how different countries respond to conflicts and humanitarian disasters, responses from throughout the world to Hamas attacks and Israeli reprisals. Some of these acts have been flagged by human rights organizations as possible war crimes, but the international response has been inconsistent, underscoring more allegations of partiality. These disparities are further demonstrated by the way that refugees are treated in Europe. The more severe treatment of Syrian migrants stands in stark contrast to the European sympathy for Ukrainian refugees. During the 2015